As some of you may know, one of my absolute favourite characters in Bleach is the leader of the Fullbringers and the gang known as Execution, Ginjo Kugo. He's the first substitute Shinigami, and he also plays the role of the main villain of the Lost Agent arc. Now, in my opinion, reception towards that story arc has actually warmed somewhat over the years, particularly after the end of Bleach itself. However, when the series was coming out on a weekly basis, it's pretty safe to say that it received its fair share of criticism from the fanbase, not all of it unwarranted. However, I have always said this, but I really enjoyed my time with the Lost Agent arc when it first came out and have continued to do so ever since, and will continue to be a staunch defender of that part of Bleach. And in fact, one of the things I think that makes it work so well is that pivotal driving character of Ginjo Kugo. Outside of Ichigo, he is clearly the main focus of this story arc, and that constant game of tug-of-war that Kubo plays with the reader as to whether Ginjo is or isn't an ally, whether he's actually a super shadowy villain in kind of pulling the strings, is what really makes everything work so well. And I think Kubo does a phenomenal job with this. He plays on his own tropes. He comes across as incredibly self-aware when writing Ginjo, in my opinion. The only mistake he makes with this character is not including a backstory in the canon manga. I think that was a genuine mistake. But outside of that, I love how Kubo handles this guy. And so in today's video, I wanted to take a look specifically at that journey we go on with Ginjo throughout the Lost Agent arc up until that moment towards the end of the story arc where his true intentions are revealed, and how Kubo does such a meticulous and fantastic job of deceiving the reader into thinking maybe we can actually trust this guy when really we should have stuck with our gut. Before we begin the video, however, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now. You're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week, and I would really appreciate the support. And also, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up as well to show your support for me, but also to increase the exposure of the video and help it reach other Bleach fans just like yourselves. And of course, if you want to take that support from me a little step further, we do now have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can support me for as little as $1 a month, and you can gain early access to videos. And of course, a massive thank you goes out to everyone who has supported me so far. We've gone over 70 patrons now, and I just couldn't be more grateful, so thank you so much. So where to begin with the character of Ginjo? Ginjo is intrinsically tied to the Lost Agent arc. Without him, it all completely falls apart. He's working both in the foreground and the background to make the story run, and Kubo does a phenomenal job of using established plot points to just completely deceive the reader on almost every level, and I love it. I think it's so good when you sit there and think about it, and you think about how this story arc actually works, and it's clear that when dealing with a smaller subset of chapters, Kubo was able to really plan this story out and have things come back from the beginning of the arc that really affect the outcome later on. So I think to kind of discuss Ginjo's, shall we say, journey with the reader, it's best to start at the beginning. Ginjo is introduced in the very first chapter of the Lost Agent arc, and it's important to remember that at this point, Ginjo is a bad guy. He has not yet been cut by Book of the End, and so he immediately seeks out Ichigo. He sets up this whole elaborate thing where someone steals his bag, so he can run into Ichigo and make an initial impression. Immediately, Kubo makes this guy look suspicious. Maybe not necessarily evil, but suspicious. He turns to kind of face the reader as you will. There's shadows all over his face. There's shadows on his face here as well. He already knows Ichigo's name. And also, this might not have anything to do with it, but he does kind of look a bit like Aizen as well. And I think that's done potentially to make him immediately someone you can't necessarily trust. But so far, so nothing new. We've already seen this before with characters like Shinji. When he first appears in the Urankar arc, you don't really know whether or not you can trust him. Perhaps he's not as outwardly made to look like a villain as Ginjo is, but he's definitely very sneaky, very suspicious, and you're not entirely sure what's going on there, particularly when he attacks Ichigo in the middle of Karakura Town. Ginjo's is a lot more slow burn, and the Lost Agent arc begins to very slowly unravel and things start to fall into place. Ginjo contacts Ichigo a couple more times, and Kubo does his darndest to make this guy appear really, really shady. And this is what I mean by Kubo playing up on his own tropes. This is him being very self-aware. Clearly at this point, Kubo wants you to not trust this guy as far as you can throw him. And that's exactly the way Ichigo is portrayed as well. Ichigo is very much a conduit for the reader in this instance, more than he ever is in the rest of the series. And I think that helps contribute to the Lost Agent feeling considerably more personal than the majority of other Bleach story arcs. But anyway, Ginjo tracks Ichigo down at his place of work, and he immediately kind of blows the doors off by having this photo of Isshin and wanting information on Ichigo's father. This all kind of turns out to be a bit of a ruse to get Ichigo's attention, but I think it does the job of, again, making you question, who is this guy? What does he actually want? What does he really know? And Kubo really plays this up again by having Ginjo have these really just shadow-filled faces, these panels that just make him look like he's a complete villain, to be honest. These panels are generally reserved for full-on bad guys. Now, of course, we can't really talk about Ginjo without talking about the general tone of this arc in general. It is darker than normal. It's very personal, very close-knit, but it is sinister. There is a real sinister air to the Lost Agent arc from almost day one. And this lingers like a thick fog throughout the entire arc. Many of the arc's pivotal scenes, including the final battle, are all set at nighttime, which is not something Kubo traditionally does. There are a lot of close-up faces in this arc, a lot of close-up mouth shots, which Kubo traditionally uses to evoke a sense of the eerie. And this all really plays into the idea that Ginjo is a bad guy. You know, that's basically what I'm getting at. That's what you're supposed to think early on. Who is this guy? Why is he skulking around? How does he know everything about Ichigo? However, Ichigo in this arc feels a certain way, and it's crucial that he does, because if he didn't, Ginjo's plan wouldn't be quite so effective, and Ichigo feels very isolated, very cut off, and increasingly paranoid about the state of the world around him and the fact that he can no longer do anything to protect those he loves. And this is something Ginjo really plays off of, to kind of expose Ichigo's weaknesses, essentially, and prey on those. So you get a moment where Karin, Ichigo's sister, is now starting to take on the role that he did. She's become a protector. You know, she now deals with spirits. And so naturally, she's going over to Urahara's shop to kind of get help from him, or, you know, just buy anything she needs. And he's offering to assist her with anything she and her family needs. All pretty above board, innocuous stuff, except Ginjo makes Ichigo think that something really sinister is going on here, and Ginjo tries to turn Ichigo against Kisuke from day one, and it's a feeling that permeates through Ichigo later on in this arc with the amazing Spotlight Brocken chapter as well. Ginjo basically says, you know, you really think you can trust this Urahara guy? What, because he saved us? That's why you think you can trust him? You know, and basically Ginjo's trying to do everything in his power to draw Ichigo to him. There's a great panel of Ginjo, which I use for the thumbnail of this video, where you just get this moment where Ichigo is forced to confront this guy, to finally just turn around and be like, I don't trust you, but I'm listening to you, but who are you? And you get this great panel of Ginjo just smirking, and I remember the Shonen Jump editors even slapping that kind of, you know, end of chapter proclamation on there, just being like, is he a friend or foe? Because really you have no idea even this far into the story arc. Ginjo is just being incredibly shifty. Now, it's around this point in time where Uryu is attacked by Tsukishima, and of course we also know from the revelations towards the end of the story arc that this is when Ginjo is cut by Book of the End. So moving forwards, Ginjo now considers himself a genuine ally to Ichigo, rather than someone who's actually trying to trick him. And again, I think Book of the End, while it might be very broken, is evidence to the fact that Kubo was able to really successfully plan out this whole story arc, because it's being used as early as here and it continues to work throughout. There's obviously the very nice little details about Ginjo's character that he calls Ichigo Kurosaki when he is evil and Ichigo when he is not. And I really like that, and that starts to come into play here. Now, it's interesting because Kubo seems to know at this point that we are on very thin ice with Ginjo. As readers, we're like, this guy's so obviously evil. Ichigo's so obviously falling into a trap. Let's just, get through this. And Kubo knows that. And so Ginjo still acts very sinister. Ichigo arrives, meets him outside Nariyuki City, and Ginjo has another very evil-looking shadowy face panel where he's like, I'm the only one you could turn to. Isn't that right? And so Ichigo's helpless. He's completely trapped by this guy. Except when Ginjo takes Ichigo into the execution headquarters, we actually find out that they're not evil. They have seemingly altruistic motives. They actually want to help Ichigo regain his Shinigami powers. And we know full well that this is something Ichigo has been wanting now, despite his, exclamations to the contrary. He does actually want this. He wants his powers back to help his friends, particularly now that they're being attacked in the street by mysterious strangers. So suddenly we have a slightly different look on the situation. Ginjo wants to help Ichigo, apparently, but as readers, we're still highly reserved. This guy is still seemingly very dodgy. Really, we have no reason to trust him otherwise yet. Just because he's extended an olive branch to Ichigo, he could very likely have ulterior motives. However, Kubo cooks up this ulterior motive for the Fullbringers, which sounds just strange enough to not be true, but enough that Ichigo would buy it, and that we would temporarily buy it as well. This idea that they hate their powers because they're hollow-based and they want to give them all to a substitute Shinigami because that's the way they can get rid of them. Ginjo says to Ichigo, he's like, we need your help, we want to be rid of these powers, will you help us do that? And it helps as well, of course, that the rest of Execution are buying into this, that they're saying like, yep, you're amazing, Ichigo, thank you for the help, we thought you might say no. And so immediately these guys who so far have seemed very, very, very shady now appear vulnerable. Like Ichigo can actually help someone again, and that's crucial. Now, I want to talk briefly about relationships in the Lost Agent arc. I said before already that it's a very personal, very intimate story arc designed to focus on the main Karakura gang, separate them, and then eventually bring them back together again. The whole arc is about bonds. Ichigo's bonds are tested in many ways in this story arc, and in more ways than one, we see Ichigo with the mantle of kind of an adult, essentially. He is, in almost every scene that they are together in this arc, he is the kind of patriarch of the household. Isshin is nowhere to be seen for the vast majority of this story arc, and that's clearly done on purpose. It's to make Ichigo kind of look like, the oldest member of the Kurosaki household. His two little sisters need and look up to him. And that's where I think two brand new relationships fit into Ichigo's life perfectly. Being the oldest child, he's never really had that other child to kind of look up to. It's only ever been his parents. That's where Ikumi Unagiya comes in, clearly, in my opinion, supposed to be some kind of surrogate older sister character. You could maybe make an argument for a mother character, but I don't think Kubo was going for that personally. I think she's supposed to be something of an even older sister for Ichigo, something he's never really had before. It could be that she's supposed to be a surrogate mother character, because obviously Ichigo at this age has never had that. However, I think she's supposed to play off of Ginjo, who in my opinion takes the form of the older brother character to Ichigo. Again, someone he has never had before. And the absence of Isshin makes this relationship way more prevalent than it normally would be. Ichigo and Ginjo's relationship throughout this story arc grows and grows and grows, and they become pretty tight towards the end of the Lost Agent. And that's something Kubo is obviously really playing up so he can pull the rug out from underneath us later on. But Ichigo begins his training with the Fullbringers, and everything seems pretty hunky-dory except for that lingering mistrust, that air of suspicion that everyone still has, the readers included. It doesn't help that Kubo loves to do these occasional, very close-up shots of Ginjo's eyes looking pretty suspicious. But at this point in time, Ginjo is, for all intents and purposes, a genuine good guy. He has been cut by Tsukishima, and he feeds Ichigo this whole backstory about their former leader, Tsukishima. He gives Ichigo an enemy for them to unite against for the Lost Agent arc. It just so happens this is the same guy who has attacked Uryu. But the training continues, and Ichigo continues to grow further away from his father and Urahara. We get that Spotlight Brocken chapter where he sort of follows them and suspects them of something wrong, and he just grows closer and closer to Ginjo instead, which is exactly what Ginjo wants. But what I truly think is so clever about Kubo's approach to this arc is that Ginjo is not lying. Everything he's saying, he thinks is true. That's the nature of Book of the End. Tsukishima has inserted himself into Ginjo's past as an enemy, and so everything Ginjo is telling Ichigo, Ginjo himself believes. And I think that's so clever because that means there's no room for error. It means there is no way Ginjo can technically slip up. And I think it's really, really smart to use Book of the End in that way to really help reinforce the plot of this arc. I would have maybe liked Ichigo and Ginjo to have had perhaps one or two more chances for a one-to-one, heart-to-heart about one another before all the crazy stuff happens at the end, but this arc is moving at a breakneck pace, even if it didn't feel like it on a weekly basis. So Tsukishima attacks the Execution hideout and battles Ginjo. Ginjo fights him. Ginjo stops Ichigo from getting involved and does seem to genuinely sort of care about Ichigo's progress. But there is still that lingering sense that he wants something else. But let's recant, where are we now with the Ichigo-Ginjo relationship? Well, they're bonding. Ginjo is there for Ichigo, like I said, where he feels no one else is. He has no real father figure currently because Isshin just doesn't seem to be around anywhere. Urahara was as well, Ichigo is very suspect of, and Ginjo has wormed his way in. And they seem to be wholeheartedly getting on. They share a couple of jokes every now and then. Kubo puts Ginjo into some comedic scenes, which he doesn't really do with the major villains of the story. Aizen and Yhwach are never really seen in a comedic light, certainly not with Ichigo, and that is done to really tell you that Ginjo and Ichigo are on the level. Ginjo is on the level. You might have suspected him at first, but he's your man. He's actually here to help you out. Because as we've already established, the Fullbringers are victims. They're victims of circumstance and they need Ichigo to get them out of this predicament. Not only that, but Ginjo is very convincing in his battle against Tsukishima, something he has also managed to turn Ichigo onto by having Uryu attacked. And so we get to the final stage of Ichigo's Fullbring training, which is where he must fight Ginjo himself. And this is where Kubo pulls off a genuine masterstroke, an actual triple bluff in my opinion. While Ginjo's actual reveal later on is perhaps not as good as Aizen's, I genuinely think the run-up to Ginjo's reveal is smarter. I think it's better written perhaps. That's not to say the Aizen one is bad, and I'm comparing it to Aizen because intrinsically it's the same kind of deal. Someone you thought was good is actually bad. But there are so many layers to the Ginjo one that it's just crazy to think about. But anyway, moving on, we get to this battle scene where Ichigo is fighting Ginjo inside of Yukio's game world, the final stage of his Fullbring training. And yet something is really amiss. Something is off. Ginjo is pressuring Ichigo, and Ichigo's still not sure where he stands with this guy. And this is what I mean by Ichigo being the voice of the reader. He internalizes this mistrust of Ginjo. He actually says at one point, I lock blades with all of my enemies and it allows me a glimpse into who they really are, but I can't see anything when I look at this guy. I don't know who he is. And he says, is it because my Shinigami powers aren't properly back yet? Or is it because I don't fully trust Ginjo yet? I haven't quite got to that stage yet. And I remember reading that and thinking, yeah, he's right. He's right, we've completely allowed Ginjo in, but we still know next to nothing about him outside of his own story. We're taking his word for everything. And sure, he puts on a good display. He seems to hate Tsukishima, but there's something not quite right. And I love that Kubo actually highlights that. It's genius, because what he does next is incredible. So Ginjo seems to cotton on to the fact that Ichigo maybe still doesn't trust him, and he takes the pretty drastic step of blinding Ichigo with a pretty brutal cut to his eyes. Ichigo is, now completely helpless, and he's like, why on earth would you do that sort of thing? And Ginjo reveals his supposed true colours. Ginjo reveals that actually he's evil. They've been using Ichigo all this time, and now he's got Ichigo exactly where he wants him, alone and helpless in this training room, and he's just going to finish him off, and then he's going to move on and kill Chad and Orihime. And it's wonderful because Ginjo is like maniacal. He punches Ichigo in the face and he's like, you lost the moment you stepped in this room with me, you idiot. You've done exactly what I wanted you to do. And he hits him again. And I remember Kubo got me hook, line and sinker. I did everything he wanted me to do as a reader. I didn't trust Ginjo the moment he showed up. Then I was lulled into a false sense of security. And when this chapter happened, I was like, I knew it. I knew it. He's evil. I can't believe it. He's a bad guy. This is absolutely crazy. And then he's not. Kubo pulls another fast one on us as readers. Right at the end of this battle, when Ginjo threatens to kill Orihime and Chad, Ichigo suddenly sees him, his body outlined by white light. Ichigo's ability to see Reiatsu is returning, and he just attacks Ginjo out of rage, and suddenly Ginjo leaps on Ichigo and takes the brunt of a massive explosion for him. It's only after this that we discover that when someone completes their full bring, they unleash an immense burst of energy that destroys the area around them and damages themselves. And Ginjo has just jumped on the proverbial grenade for Ichigo here. He's locked him down, taken the hit for him. We see Ginjo bloodied and bruised, his clothes in tatters. And it's wonderful because Ginjo afterwards is like clinging on to Ichigo and he's like, I'm sorry I had to play the villain, but I needed you to get that power. I needed you to feel like your friends were in danger because that is what pushes you forwards. Despair pushes you forwards, which is something Ginjo realizes earlier on in the arc. And Ichigo is looking on with this like just bewildered look on his face, and Ginjo is just covered, like I said again, in blood and smoke, having jumped on the grenade for Ichigo and taken this hit for him. They are now firmly bonded as friends. There is no doubt in our mind anymore. Ginjo is clearly a good guy. He even says, I'm really sorry for the cheesy bad guy act. It's just not something I can do. But I just needed you to act. I needed you to think your friends were in danger. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for playing such a hokey villain, but congratulations. You've finished your full bring. You've done it. It's a wonderful moment because it is the moment you're supposed to be like, yeah, okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe Ginjo actually is a good guy after all, because even after all of that, even after cutting Ichigo's eyes open, it was all just part of a test. It was all part of something bigger. And what's always been so crazy to me about this arc is that it's technically all true. Ginjo is still under the influence of Book of the End, which means he does still consider Ichigo to be a genuine ally in the battle against Tsukishima. So Ginjo faking this whole bad guy routine and then taking the blast for Ichigo, it's real. Their bond at the moment is real, in so much as it can be when under the influence of Book of the End, and that's what makes the reveal later on all the more devastating for Ichigo. And I just think the way Kubo wrote it was phenomenal. You also have to bear in mind as well that at this point in the story we don't quite know what Tsukishima's power is. We have an idea, but we're not certain. So we just think this is who Ginjo is. And it's so well done. And then once again, what does Kubo do? He follows up this dramatic moment with a comedic one, again trying to hammer home that this is the same kind of relationship Ichigo has with any of his friends. Renji, Shinji, people like that in the past. Ichigo's like being forced to do all these press-ups. It's a funny, cute moment. Orahime's in her pajamas in some little house, eating donuts and hot dogs with Riruka. Nothing could be better right now. These guys are clearly lovely. Except Riruka has a look on her face at one point where she might give the game away, and she sort of says, "You're an idiot," to Orihime when she leaves very quietly under her breath. It's not a malicious "you're an idiot," it's like a why can't you just get out? You know, why can't you see what's going on here? And so we move into the final act of this arc. Everything's gone crazy. Tsukishima has revealed his grand plan to essentially brainwash all of Ichigo's friends, turn the whole town against him. Ichigo loses that older sister in Ikumi. She has now been brainwashed by Tsukishima, and he can only turn to, you guessed it, Ginjo, who comes running out of the darkness at almost a scheduled moment of opportunity to tell Ichigo that all of execution have been brainwashed by Tsukishima. And so now it's just Ichigo and Ginjo against the world, exactly how Ginjo wanted it to be. Now bear in mind, he is still at this point a genuine ally of Ichigo's, and they eventually go to this little abandoned warehouse, this final meeting place that only Ginjo knows of. And we get one of the best moments of the arc, which I believe is chapter 464, Sheath Breaker. And Ichigo and Ginjo just have this really candid conversation between the two of them. Ichigo has seen his whole world turned upside down. He grabs Ginjo and he's like, "This would never have happened if you hadn't come into my life. You know, you've done this to me." And Ginjo's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. You know, you're right. We just wanted to help, but yeah, I've dragged you into this." And Ichigo's like, "No, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're only trying to help me." And at this point, we know as readers how Ichigo feels about Ginjo. That sense of mistrust he had in the training room is gone. He actively says, "You are only trying to help me. I know this is none of your fault." But of course it is. And Ichigo and Ginjo are then taken. Ginjo has now revealed that he thinks Tsukishima's true ability is to alter the past, which is effectively true, essentially, for the purposes of the story. And they go to Tsukishima's manor for the final showdown. And we all know what happens from here. This is essentially the end of our journey with Ginjo. During the big fight, Ginjo is struck by Tsukishima's Book of the End. Ichigo thinks that Ginjo may now be turned against him. However, the truth is technically that, but not in the way Ichigo thinks. Ginjo awakens from his slash and he's like, "Look out, don't worry about me, Kurosaki, look out for the guy behind you." And again, another one of those lovely little details that really tells you Kubo has planned this whole thing out, because Ginjo is a bad guy again now, and he says Kurosaki rather than Ichigo, which is lovely little detail that gets brought up later. And so now we get the reveal that Ginjo has been a villain all along, and this persona that he has had with Ichigo this whole time has been fake, essentially. He's never really been his ally, he's always been against him. And that was really the crux of what I wanted to talk about with you in today's video. It's just this incredible journey that Kubo takes us on with Ginjo Kugo that, in my opinion, leads to him easily being one of the best written villains in the series. I truly lament that he doesn't get a backstory, because I think it makes it difficult to sympathise with his motivation, which is also lacking, which is pretty bad news for a main villain of an arc. However, I think everything else is handled beautifully. It genuinely is like a triple bluff. You're supposed to think Ginjo is evil at the beginning. You're clearly supposed to. Kubo then kind of works on you a bit to come round to Ginjo and execution and think maybe these guys are actually on our side. However, that feeling of mistrust never goes away. Kubo plays on that feeling of mistrust by having Ginjo actually acknowledge it in the story and pretend to be a villain, only to basically come out and say, "Yeah, I was faking being a bad guy, I'm so sorry, I'm actually on your side, well and proper." And at this point, we as readers are like, maybe this guy's alright after all. Like, how many times can we go through this rigmarole? He's clearly on Ichigo's side. Oh, no, he's not on Ichigo's side, he's actually a bad guy. He's actually genuinely a bad guy. it's just so well done. I love it, and there are some clues dropped throughout as well. Uryu, in particular, his plot line, as small as it is all about him thinking, maybe I wasn't attacked by the same person who, is attacked Orihime, because at this point you're supposed to think Tsukishima attacked Uryu, but actually it was Ginjo. Again, showing Kubo's planning, Uryu actually looks over his shoulder as opposed to looking at who's in front of him, implying he was attacked from behind, not from in front, as it looks like in the story. And yeah, so I can't really gush enough about how well I think Ginjo is written, how well I think Kubo uses established plot points like Book of the End to really, truly deceive his readers into thinking that Ginjo might actually be a good guy. I love how self-aware Kubo is, how he quite obviously plays on his own tropes of the whole shadowy face, making Ginjo clearly look evil at the start, but then taking us for a ride, making us think he's actually a good guy by making a major sacrifice for Ichigo later on, but only to reveal, of course, that everything up until now was a lie. And I commend Kubo for it as well, because I think clearly he personally felt that he was going to do something similar to Aizen, but wanted to differentiate it as well, and that's where I think you get the very personal connection between Ichigo and Ginjo, that idea that Ginjo could be a surrogate older brother for Ichigo under some circumstance. I just think it's wonderfully handled, and I think that's why the twist still really worked for me. I was still shocked. And that's what I think is the ultimate way to sum this video up. When the Lost Agent arc began, chapter 424, and I saw Ginjo Kugo, I saw him turn to the camera and be like, you're an interesting one, Kurosaki Ichigo, shadows on his face, I was like, bad guy. Bad guy. And then later on when you see him being like, I'm the only one you can turn to, shadows on his face, I was like, bad guy. I was like, this guy is so obviously evil. And yet, when he actually betrays Ichigo, when he stands up behind him with that absolutely terrifying look on his face, that crazy page that has never been replicated, which is completely unique looking, Ichigo's expression of utter horror on his face, I felt the same way. I was like, oh my god, he's actually evil. Like, I was like, I can't believe he's actually a bad guy. And that's how Kubo did it so well, in my eyes anyway. I went from being so certain he was evil to being shocked when he was. And that's why I think Ginjo Kugo is one of Bleach's best written villains. Alright, but I really hope you enjoyed that video, guys. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with me. Did you like how Kubo handled Ginjo Kugo throughout the Lost Agent arc? Did you like the way Kubo seemed to be very self-aware, and the way it just really felt like everything was tied together quite nicely, like the arc had quite clearly been planned in advance? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.